Thank you for choosing this Analyst Insight Podcast from the Information Security Forum. This is the latest in a series connected with more general information security topics. My name is Mark Ward. I'm a Senior Research Analyst at the ISF, and in this podcast we're talking about policies, governance and information security strategies in general. And we're delighted to be talking to a couple of folks from ISF member organisation Visma, which has a very interesting, innovative approach to all those topics. And here to talk about Visma is Espen Johansen, Director of Security at Visma, and Arbnora Tahiri, one of the company's security managers. Hello to you, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Good to have you here. And also here is Paul Watts, former CISO, a distinguished ISF analyst, and someone who has a long experience with policies, governance, information security, and all those kinds of things. Hello, Paul.
Hi, good to be here, and looking forward to hearing the brave new world of governance, risk, and compliance.
Oh yeah, it's exciting.
Well, you say that, but it is. You know, I'm doing some research on governance, and one of the fascinating aspects of it is how differently it's done. It has to be in every organisation. It's very much tailored to them, and I think a lot of people I'm talking to, they're either at the end of quite a long project and and are proud of their work and have got something to talk about and they're really enthused, or they're right in the trenches and fighting battles. But I think you guys are. I really wanted to talk to you because of you have a not quite a unique structure, I don't think. But yeah, if you can both just initially talk about Visma, how it works. And how I guess that you've had to adapt your information security strategy to fit the way it operates.
Yeah, I can start first a bit. Hi, I'm Espen, everybody. And when we made the security program or the security practices that we do have in Visma, it was designed around the premise that we should design all the information security strategy around the strategy for the company. So when the company transforms and changes, as Visma does continuously, we have to adapt and transform the security strategies to make sure that we always are built to support the actual strategy of the company. If not, then we're just fighting the actual strategy, which is very stupid. And part of that is, if you look at Visma as a company, it's not a corporate and it's not a conglomerate. It's more of a PE company. We basically buy companies a lot, and at current we are on an acquisition kind of rate of approximately one a week. And last year we bought 42 companies. Wow. But we are essentially a technology company that develops software. That's what we do for a living. And we also acquire lots of companies. So we're a highly acquisitive company.
Right. So how many companies are in Visma structure then as a whole? Is it over 100 or something like that? Or?
Oh yes, it's well north of 200.
Wow.
It's depending on how you count it also. And it's always quite interesting when you look at the structure of a company of this magnitude. Is how you count is something different depending on the things you would like to achieve. But it's north of 200 companies.
Oh, that must be crazy to manage because there's. I mean, obviously, I talked with a lot of ISF members are in very large organisations, but at least they're not quite one thing, but they have that monolithic structure, I suppose. But yeah, 200 entities. That's Paul. I don't know. Is that outside your realm of experience? But that seems that's a lot.
Well, I mean, I've worked for organisations that are conglomerates as well, and they've been doing a lot of merger acquisition and divestment activity. And as our research showed, we did some research on that in 2021. Understanding the security posture, and actually to an extent the governance posture of the organisations that you're ingesting or letting go, is quite an important part of due diligence. And I'm genuinely curious to understand how close the security team at Visma is to that process, and is that part of your due diligence? Do you look at that acquiring organisation and say, like, so what are they doing? What's their strategy? How do they govern themselves? And do they have parity with the way that we would like them to work?
Oh yes, definitely. And it's a large part of the security programs that we do have is to be a very much so integrated part of the due diligence process. So we do have specialized people within the teams that both me and Arbnora has that basically just does due diligence. That's their job. And as a highly acquisitive company, we have to have that capacity. The second thing about that is that the entire program is designed around being able to cater for all of these new diverse companies that comes in. And one of the things we found out quite early in this process of designing this architecture is that if we are to be a highly acquisitive company, we have to devise services, or we have to offer services, security services that people choose to use instead of are forced to use. Because the element of force is something that really doesn't work in a democratized world. So we have to create the best services instead of just a service that caters for some things that some council of elders would like to achieve.
So can I ask Arbnora, so you're act as a CISO for some of these companies at Visma, is that right? Is that what you...
I wouldn't like to call a CISO. Espen likes that, but I call more as a partner for the companies belonging to SMB segment. I am the partner for the Visma security program, and I help them to understand the benefit of using this program, and of course, understanding the difficulties and struggles. And in this way, we make a better program for them. So, yeah.
Okay. So just to understand, then I guess you don't have any centralized policies. Then you have I suppose you have goals that you would like them to meet, but can they meet them anyway?
Yeah, we do have centralized policies. Of course we have. That's how it is. But it's how they're implemented. I strongly believe that when you write a policy, that's a highly important and critical task. You have to write a policy. And you have to be able to work with fellows and peers to find the best strategy, to meet the business strategy, to support it. But when you have done that, that is when the job starts. That's not when it's over. That's when it starts. So then you start thinking, how do you implement this? How do you make people choose the wise words that you've written in the policies? Like you state to them that you should have very strong passwords. Well, how do you implement that? So you devise some kind of, as you said, Arbnora.
How do you make it easy for people to implement that? Because I have worked in other companies, and it's easy to write policies and rules, but if you don't make it easy for people to implement these policies, and also in the other side, if you don't measure the compliance, I don't think it gives it gives a false sense of the security within the company. So.
Yeah, I do agree. And we tend to refer back to kind of mother-daughter or father-daughter metaphors, me and Arbnora, when we talk, because we are both proud parents. And I think one of the discussions we've had, Arbnora, is about sugary treats in the house. So I think most parents would agree that it's not something that you would advise your kids to eat for breakfast. So then it could be a good implementation to not have them around in the kitchen around breakfast time, maybe hide them. And then instead put forward fruit and nice things for them. Then you can implement it by nudging instead of using brute force and a pointy finger whenever they steal a candy from you.
Right.
But that's really interesting. So I love that analogy. The child, an inquisitive child, and then a petulant one when they become a teenager, will say, "Well, why?" And this is where the policy looks up. So it goes back to what you were saying earlier. Actually, the policy is describing an outcome. The outcome is we would prefer you to eat healthily. One of what you need to do is not eat sugary treats at breakfast. So you kind of it's a really good, eloquent kind of description of that. You need the bit above and below, the why, the what, and the how, and then support the organisation to keep making sure that is aligned with the visions and the strategies and the objectives of the organisation. You certainly don't write a policy and go, job done, and walk away. What's the point in that?
Yeah, I agree with you. And you can also further that is that when you try to explain these things, if you use the child parent metaphor, so if you explain it to the children in the adult language, they will not understand it. But if you translate it to their language, their context, so contextually delivered policies is kind of key. How do you contextualize things?
Yes, and I can relate to this because if you as a parent have kind of a govern role for your children, and sometimes that can be scary. We have seen that also for our organization when the rules or the policies come from higher level or from the board. It's kind of scary for them. But in one experiment that we did, I came from the side and I came as a partner for helping them and being there for them to help to achieve their goals. And it worked, actually. We have data that tells us that loving and caring approach works much better than top-down approach.
Or carrying a big stick. But I did want to ask about that, whether you've experimented with this, and I guess it's been refined over several years. And so did you try that, that sort of big stick method before? And I guess it just didn't work.
Oh, yes. I'm ex-military. I love big sticks. But But it doesn't work. I just have to realize that I'm now ex-military. I'm proud to say that I'm ex. The X in front is really important. I've learned that doesn't work when you deal with intelligent people. When you deal with developers and highly intelligent people, you have to be able to speak their language. If not, you're seen as a dimwit. So you cannot do that. And then if you speak in the pure governance language, they seem to not understand it because it's built around the context of people with similar minds, concocting ideas and sentences that doesn't make sense to others. So you have to translate them into the context of the ones who are going to consume it. So, and this translation, I think, is one of the magic elements in our approach, is where we try to contextualize it to boards. Like part of the job for me and Arbnora is to communicate with boards, and we have tons of those. So how to do chair trainings, how to train the boards in there, and how can they work with this? They are very good with numbers, for instance. So we give them numbers because they understand numbers, and they tend to like red, yellow, and green lights. So if things are green, they don't have to deal with that. If it's red, they have to deal with it, and they are very efficient at dealing with stuff. And developers, they need context, and they need to have it in their context. I think one of the things that we are really proud of, Arbnora, is kind of the data that we have harvested over the years from testing over 700 million lines of code every day. So when we buy someone who is basically programming in COBOL, we actually know what kind of deficiencies to look for in COBOL because we have already tested COBOL for years, or in C#, C++, Ruby, or whatever language you can think of.
Okay.
So it's great fun.
Yeah, but I guess because it sounds like there's a massive structure in place here. So I guess that's quite a commitment by Visma to set this up, run this, and maintain it. But I guess it must prove its value, because if you didn't do this, well, the structure wouldn't work, the company wouldn't work, and people would be getting breached all over the place, and that brings its own costs and problems with it as well, I suppose.
I think it's some of the evidence that we look for is that we have one of the visions of Visma is to be the preferred partner of European entrepreneurs. And so far, I think on the last slide I checked, that was early May, then 24 companies have joined us so far that year.
Okay.
So these are the acquisitions that year. So and now the number is much higher. I don't have the actual number right now, but it's quite frequently when we buy companies. And they wouldn't come here if we weren't capable of offering them some services, both within finance and security. But security is one of those big elements that is offered to all.
Yeah.
And they seem to like it a lot, these new entrepreneurial companies, because of people like Arbnora, who comes in with love and caring instead of a big stick.
Yeah.
The big stick just doesn't work anymore in a civilized world.
No.
Yeah. And of course, it's very important to understand their context, to hear them, to listen to them, how they think about that. So, yeah, I think that is functioning, really.
Yeah.
In
But I guess most of the companies you acquire have to go through some significant change to be part of the Visma family, I suppose. And is it no? All right. Okay.
No, they're not. And I think if you look at it from, let's go into the compliance world, because I think that's a world where all four of us can be quite comfortable. So if you look at the design of the program, it is designed around assets. And all of the protection programs are asset-specific protection programs. So if you take an asset like an application, a web application, it has certain characteristics. And if you look into the old common criteria playbook, you had these asset-specific protection programs. So what we have is a modern permutation of that, where we have applied protection methodology, basically security activities, where doing these security activities benefits security, like static analysis of source code, which is that all researchers recommend to do. So we have just institutionalized it and put metrics on it and made sure that people actually do it. Like when the kids, when you remove their candy from the desk and you introduce the healthy food, you test to see if they have eaten the healthy food. You just don't assume that they have done it.
Also, we work a lot to embed this culture, security culture, within our teams, and that helps a lot. So they are self-aware of the importance of these things.
Right.
I think that's absolutely critical. I was having this conversation with somebody, one of the regulatory bodies, about, it's great to have 3 lines of defense, but you're missing something if you don't think about the culture of the organization that wraps around that. And it comes back to the analogy of, don't tell somebody they've got to do it or achieve a particular outcome if they don't understand why and how that contributes to the bigger picture. Then they're always going to resist. You've got to get this balance of friction and GRCA absolutely right. And the only way you do that is if the people who are responsible for imparting those controls, assuring those controls, realize that they're contributing to something important, and they see that bigger picture. The other thing I was going to say is, it bemuses me, to be honest. We've often had this issue, security leaders, we struggle to get influence in the boardroom. We can't do this, we can't do that. And it comes down to a fundamental thing. As you say, it's talking the business's language. And it's so important. And you're seeing this kind of step change now. And this if you don't want to be a CISO, Arbnora, you can become a BISO, a business information security officer. That business-centric interface to that security competency that sits in the center, that provides those services. But you're more about understanding how that translates to good business outcomes. And that absolutely works. It's such a simple change, and I'm just so pleased that we're recognizing now that cybersecurity is not just a technical discipline. We've got to be providing something that resonates with our consumers, and they are our consumers, our customers.
I mean, it sounds like that sort of consumers here are happy with the change. I mean, they're happy with what's going on as well, and because I guess they can see the benefits. You're not just telling them to do things because you think those are the right things to do. Then it proves itself by by the difference it makes.
Yeah, and I was also kind of, we have used the research approach too much. So we have published a couple of books and some research reports on this. And one of the things that amazed me when I started working with this is the effect a security manager can have on the answers that he's given. So if you ask questions as a CISO, the context that the people answer the questions in is always these are questions asked by the CISO. Yes. So I've been forbidden by all my researchers to ask any questions myself. So it has to be done by actual researchers, because then we get true valid data that we can use for something. If not, it's just take it.
Yeah. You can see the approach also the companies people are having in the meeting when you are kind of an employee in the group security and you are there just to help. You are not a CISO. You are not something with a higher role, and you're there just to understand their view, their difficulties, and of course helping them to be better. So
I think it's interesting because I've talked to a couple of other CISOs who are in similar situations in that they have quite a distributed structure, by no means as many as Visma has, but they've recognized the limitations of their influence and have tried to embed that culture so it rises up rather than people aren't forced into a pattern. They have stakeholders and champions, etc. out there, and they do a lot of the work for you. But that takes time and effort, and it's a real job to do.
Yes, and we have to discuss this, Mark. It is the kind of the native versus the implant, and I love that discussion because we have done that in 2 experiments, and you can also read all about that in the books, of course. But the element of how do you get an insider into an organization to start transforming it? So if you're talking about it like in the spy way, you have a human that you need to embed somewhere to change the inner dynamics. But we did it the other way around. That was also based on the research outcome. So we had to grow someone native to become the security champion. So it had to emanate from the team, and it had to report to the local management, not to the security manager, not to me.
Okay.
So the security engineers, as we have named them that because people didn't want to be champions. Champions is something that is from Little League. It's kind of like it may be a Nordic thing, but everybody participating got a participation medal. That's a champion. So you don't want to be that. You want to be an engineer. Right. So then we had several hundreds of these security engineers that basically was appointed by their own crew. They were appointed inside their own teams, and they are the ones we started to give love and affection to first. And they're the native. They're part of the Scrum meetings. They're part of the daily ceremonies. And when they are giving love and affection by people like myself or Arbnora, they become powerful. That means that you build the power up from the bottom, not from the top.
Yeah.
And they have...
Sorry, Espen. I mean, it's quite disarming as well. If you're trying to impart a security message, those people can evangelize on why it's important in the right language and in the right context. I've worked for big organizations before where we've tried to downline key security awareness and socio-cultural messages, and they just don't translate. So outside of the corporate world, you go into the operational space, but they can't understand what that means to them in their terms. So if you've got somebody on the other side who's that security engineer with that business hat on, with that operations hat on, they can put the right spin on it, and it's disarming. It's done with them. It's not being done to them. It's an approach that absolutely works.
I can attest to that, and we have brilliant examples of that. We also try the opposite way to try to do implants. They rarely work. They normally go native after a while. That's when they start working. So when we do the implants, so let's say we have an Arbnora that now goes into as a CISO into a segment with the thing. I think it's slightly above 30 companies. You do have Arbnora?
Yes, 33. Right
33 companies, yeah. So that's the amount of companies that she has the role to be a CISO of, and that's a quite large task, isn't it? But when she starts that journey, she is the alien. She is the implant. After a while, if she's good at human relations, good at this kind of interpersonal relations, and have really good skills in that area, she becomes a native. Almost like the anthropologist approach instead of the typical spy approach. So it really makes sense when you do it in that manner.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a really, really important point, and being slightly controversial, because that's what I do. I would argue that a lot of GRCA teams don't work like that, and they are lacking particular qualities and soft skills that allow them to work with the business in the right way. What advice would you give to those organizations? First of all, they've got to accept they've got a problem, right? But moving past that, what do they do next? Does the world need more Arbnoras? Is it as simple as that?
Yes, it's as simple as that. But I can give you some pointers. I think one of the things is to experiment with UX, actually, customer journeys. Try to familiarize yourself with that premise and try to sell GRC instead of just implementing it, because implementing it is the kind of toy for a technician. When you do a customer journey, there's a different way of approaching it. So, because if you kind of embrace the entire journey, you understand that the humans involved are the true element that you need to cater for. When you try to make people use some of your GRC services, if you just use the normal language that is used for making this, which is a backstage language that we use, it's a backstage, very precise language. It's not supposed to be on front stage. On front stage, you have different elements that are at play, and then you can measure behavior. Going back to the metaphor with the kids again. How do you measure if the kids actually eat the healthy foods instead of the sugary treats? You can see it on their performance, their sleeping habits. Yep. Are they nice to you? Are they civilized? Yep. Because it's so easy to observe. And if you observe their kind of observed behavior, instead of just asking them questions, have you eaten the snack or not? Because they will lie to you.
You know the answer already. So.
Yeah, that's right. And also there's that... as well, I can't remember, but it's if you give someone a target. So if you try to measure someone, that becomes their target, and that's all they aim for. And whatever they're supposed to do to reach that, it does get forgotten. But one thing I did want to ask as well is what happens when it doesn't work? Do you ever have organizations you acquire that just resist and say we don't want to do this? Or yeah. And so what do you do then? Do they get the big stick, or do they get the sugary treat?
No. More Arbnora. No, and this is the very brutal, very short version of it. We need to use more energy, of course, and those who resist, they mainly resist because they don't understand. So then you explain, and sometimes you meet the wrong person, because I believe most of you as GRC practitioners have sent out queries to people, and you've gotten some ludicrous answers. So it's obviously the wrong person you're talking to. And then you go one step further and you find the right person, because they're always there. The right people are always there. You just have to find them.
Yes, and also when sometimes it doesn't work, it should be a reason why it's not working. So you need to talk with them, understand, maybe we need to do something in other ways so they can feel comfortable with that. But without talking and having that communication, it's kind of
difficult. And sometimes we can actually learn a lot from these new companies. So if they come in with a very high security posture and they're very good at what they do, they are now becoming our new champions. We can learn from, so we can evolve our programs from them.
Right.
And that's really important as well. And again, at risk of being slightly controversial, something that security practitioners historically haven't been very good at is that humility and that learning journey. We talk about security as an industry that is constantly learning, constantly evolving. So is business. There could be someone out there doing something that you've never seen or heard of before, and you should take that on board and learn and adapt and bring that value back to your organization and impart it to others as well. Rather than just saying, this is the list of things I need you to do, and it's tick, 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 and I'm not really interested in anything else. It's a very narrow-minded approach to GRCA. So I think that's a really important point as well, Espen.
I do agree, and I've seen some of the companies that we acquired who have extremely good security practices. They are above and beyond most people in, for instance, static analysis or some of the really technical shift left things, but they might be lacking in some of the shift right things. They might be afraid of bug bounties, which is another part of what we do. So they might be very good at the one part, but they might lack skills here. So then we can learn from where they're good, and then we can educate where they are not so good.
Yeah.
That means that the people choice, you need more Arbnoras, basically.
You do. How do you go about? Hear me out. This might sound a little bit weird, but I think it's possible to have compliance without governance, and I think that's absolutely wrong. And that brings organisations into a bit of an illusionary state where they say, "Well, we've got a piece of paper that says we're great," and actually we're not doing anything with that. Really, that's not driving strategic alignment. And how do you educate an organisation that's very good at compliance but not very good at governance? And I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I just want to explore that a little bit with you.
Oh, hell yes. This is really fun, Paul. So thank you for being very controversial. I love this stuff. So since we are a highly acquisitive company and we do due diligence and we take that seriously, that means that we don't assume that the statements that they give us are true. We test and validate. So when they say that they have really good software quality, why do we then find thousands of bugs in their code? If they are really secure and have all the 27,001s of the world, why do we then find gaping holes in their software security when we pen test them, which we always do when we do acquisitions? Democratized intelligence also part of this. So we do harvest vast amounts of intelligence about our companies and how they work. So why don't they know that they have breaches? Why don't they? So it's so easy to see through compliance walls. It's so incredibly easy if you just test them. But if they have paperwork says that they are good and our tests show the same, it has never happened, to be quite honest. But if it does, if it does once, then I'll be sure to shout it from the rooftops, because then I would be really proud of them.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen.
All right. So compliance doesn't get you any decent governance, I suppose. I mean, I suppose it can, but it's rare that it would.
I've seen, at least from my own experience, from all the companies that we have acquired, that yes, you can achieve lots of things with good compliance and good governance. Yes, you can do really great work there, but only if the compliance and governance is completely in line with the strategy of the company. So if it's an isolated silo, it doesn't work at all. Then it just is paperwork. It's just security theater on the side.
And that's the problem that you have. A compliance structure, a framework can be quite rigid, but its value is defined by applying it in a particular context. So if you're just ticking the same boxes and doing the same controls in a particular area over and over again, and unbeknownst to you, the business is changing, over time. That's the way that business works. It's hugely agile. You could be testing things over here that actually have no value at risk whatsoever. You should be testing the new things that are coming in, or an organisation that acquires another one, and the compliance mandates aren't updated to start inspecting what you expect in that particular part of the world as well. It's so important that compliance has a sense of purpose beyond ticking a regulatory box, and I think that's the point that Espen and Arbnora are really making strongly here with the journey they've gone with Visma.
I could also add a second value here. That's also something that we have learned a lot from. It is to acknowledging that the world is more than security, and acknowledging that in HR, they also have governance, compliance, and in the same in quality, the same in finance, the same in license, in vendor management, in all of these. So if all of these compliance elements pulls in different directions, all of them partially in compliance with the actual governance structure of the company. So we have been very clear on separating what is the actual power structure of the company, and we are part of that power structure. So I know that the boards are the important things and the MDs are important. So therefore we educate the boards, and sometimes we go inside the boards and be there. So we choose when we engage in the boards.
That's interesting, because I think, and Mark, you're probably closer to this, the research that you're doing at the moment. We have found situations where a lot of organisations that are trying to evolve their security governance try and repurpose existing instruments of governance within the organisation. That's not necessarily the right answer. I think that's what you're saying, Espen. Mark, is that what you're seeing with your research? And then Espen, is there anything more you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think certainly some of the people I've talked to are, like I say, are in the trenches, and they realise they've got a problem, and how they've been doing compliance and the governance structures they've got in place clearly are not fit for purpose anymore, and there's some tension emerging there, and they need to try and resolve it. But I'm not sure they know how to do it, and I guess that's why we're doing the research, just try and give them some good advice on this kind of way. But yeah, definitely there's some big problems out there for sure.
I could give some extra on that one, because I've been working a lot with this a small square basically of 4 different individuals that I've just put some names on. You have the security officer, which tends to want to subsume others in their own paradigm, often heard yelling words like 27001. So it's a word that's a favorite of security people. And then you have the developer over there, which is a second kind of character in this. And he also wants to subsume everybody else in his paradigm. And he's often heard yelling words like Agile, Jira, and Confluence and stuff like that. And then you have the third person in this room, the operations guy, who also wants to subsume others in their own paradigm, and he's heard yelling words like ITIL, service desk, and stuff like that. And then the fourth character is the board member. He rarely listens to any of these words because they don't describe his reality. So he shouts other words. He shouts words like buy an insurance or invest or divest. So it is only when you can get all 4 of those characters to harmonize, to talk about the same thing, break down those barriers between those specific fields, that you can have real progress. And that's one of the things that we have worked a lot with cultural wise in Visma.
Yeah.
Is to break down these barriers and make sure these things can coexist.
Yeah, I think that's certainly what's emerging from the work I'm doing, is that CISOs or the folks in the security organization have to be those diplomats. They have to travel between those worlds or those different, those different paradigms, and try and get them talking and try and be part of the team that brings everything together. Because I think that's when, like you say, good things happen when you're all talking the same kinds of language. Otherwise, you're just shouting at each other and no one's making any sense.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that when we look for, when I go look at companies that we have either an interest in buying or we would like to at least venture into their field of specialty, is to talk to the people behind. So if I find an Arbnora in that company that is really knowledgeable, really skilled at what she does, and she has a good balance between what is the actual strategy of the company. Yeah, we are selling software, and that means that I have secured software primarily. Or do I meet a pinhead who only thinks about the physical security and the gates and the locks and the doors? So then I know that if I meet the second category, then I will probably find something that has very good paperwork, but I will not find anything that's strong within the product. If I meet an Arbnora, probably the core values are secured. But the doors and locks can be completely horrendously crappy. And that doesn't matter for that company. It is what are they delivering? What's their key deliverables?
Yeah, I think
it's so easy to fall in that trap.
I think that great understanding of an organization is absolutely key to all these aspects of this. I'm just conscious of time. So I just want to say thank you, everybody. Thanks, Espen. Thanks, Arbnora. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone, for listening. You can find more podcasts on the ISF podcast channel or at securityforum.org, where you can also learn more about ISF research, tools, and guidance.